Welcome everyone, from ladies to gents. Today is Monday. Today it's also May the 15th. As you very well know, 771 years ago, Pope Innocent IV issued the papal decree called Ad Extirpanda. This was the decree which stated, as you very well know, Citra membri diminutionem et mortis periculum. Which means, yes, guys, you can torture heretics, but please make sure you don't make them lose a limb or kill them. So it's nice to know that even back then they were torturing people responsibly. Talking about torture, today our torture has been lessened since a couple of days ago when Blizzard nerfed the more problematic, the more out of tune bosses in Mythic Plus. So now, almost at the end of the first week of Mythic Plus, it's time to go and take a look at how exactly Mythic Plus has went in this first week, from which specs have been going into Mythic Plus, which have been going well, which have been popular, right? What kind of meta might we be seeing starting to take place, starting to take form in this new season? We can make the usual disclaimers. Many of these specs, the majority of the players don't have a 2-piece set bonus, and even more so, they don't have a 4-piece set bonus, so things are still bound to change, a lot based on the power that players will get from the tier. But for now, in the first week, these are the results. Starting from the tanks, because the tanks are the least impressive in the sense that we knew this was going to happen. We have Protection Paladin taking basically the attention as a Mythic Plus when it comes to tanks, even starting from the all key levels. So even with players much less interested in pushing very high keys, even with players much less interested in being very competitive in Mythic Plus, we still see right from week 1 almost 40% of all tanks in Mythic Plus being Protection Paladins. That is already quite the jump, quite the very heavy start, leaning towards Prot Paladin. Of course, if this is the situation at all key levels, once you start going into the higher keys, into the top keys and such, one getting into the 20 plus 20 key range, Protection Paladin jumps to almost 50%. So almost half of the tanks you will find at that level will be pink. Interesting that DK, Blood DK, is the second most popular. This was also expected. Perhaps less expected is to see Brewmaster Monk also quite high. If I had to guess, given the buffs that were given before the patch and the power of the tier sets, I was going to bet on Vengeance Demon Hunter being quite good, but apparently for now Brewmaster Monk is the way to go as the third tank. Much bigger, of course, much bigger fall from Protection Warrior, which used to have a very powerful start of the season in Season 1. Now it's actually battling not to be last below Guardian Druid, which is a sad end for the spec. Now, the sad end for healers isn't nearly as bad for Preservation Evoker. We have to be honest. They did start similar to Prot Warrior as the dominant pick in Season 1, and now, as you can see, in all key levels, there is a change. Now it is split between Resto Shaman, Restoration Druid. They are basically replicating the situation of Season 1, except Shaman has taken the place of Evoker. Now Evoker is in the average third best option next to Discipline Priest. This situation gets a bit more lopsided once you get into the high key level. We still have Resto Shaman first and Druid second, but the gap is larger. Now Shaman is more prevalent. Third place stays for Evoker. They are keeping up at the moment above Discipline and above Holy Paladin. Meanwhile, Mr. Monk is dead in the water. Of course, as usual, Mr. Monk has received approximately 74 buffs before the release of the season. They have gotten buffs to the tier set as well, and nobody cares because nobody plays Mr. Monk right now. It will be interesting to see amongst the more played specs like Shaman, Druid, Evoker, Discipline, and even Holy Paladin how things are going to move around once the specs gain the tier. In particular, the ones who are not very high up right now, but who do have a stronger tier than their opposition. For example, Shaman is first, but Evoker has a stronger tier. Restoration Druid has a stronger tier, Discipline has a stronger tier, and Holy Paladin all have a stronger tier set than Restore Shaman. Obviously, there is another bigger issue as to why Shaman is so valuable, and also Evoker to a degree, which is the use of Bloodlust. So we will see, looking at the DPS picks, if there is an alternative to use Bloodlust in the party outside of your healer. Because once we move over to the melee DPS, well, the first answer is no, because pinks don't have Bloodlust, and pink here is also dominating, just like the tank. Red Paladin is far and ahead the largest and most played spec overall, out of all the key levels. You know, if I wasn't lazy, I would have went back in time and checked all of the first weeks of the early starts of a season, and I might even be confident in saying that this is the largest popularity of a single spec in the melee DPS category at the start of a season. Being 25%, being 1/4 out of all of the picks, when you have at your disposal 13 different specs, and you have 25% of the share as a single spec is huge. You expect this type of numbers at high keys, right? When things start getting very competitive, we have seen 30, 40, even 50, in some disastrous cases, even 60% of all the players being of a certain spec, but not at all key levels, right? All key levels is when the more casual players, the more non-habitual Mythic Plus player join in, and Red Paladin still is that popular at that level. The situation gets a bit more balanced, a bit more even once we jump into the actual competitive side of Mythic Plus. 20 plus keys, you do see Red still being first, still being the most popular, but there are plenty of other mini specs now being more valuable. You have Fury, you have Subtlety, you also have a bit of Enhancement and much more Havoc, Demon Hunter as options in Mythic Plus. This was part of the problem I was referencing to, the fact that you need a Bloodlust in your party, and at the moment Survival, of course, is like super dead, so you're not getting Bloodlust from Survival, and Enhancement Shaman at the moment is behind 4 other specs to be part of a group. So right now, your most likely source of Bloodlust is still residing on your healer. And lastly, we move on to the range DPS. So, range DPS is the most similar to Season 1, because we have very popular Hunters, as usual. We also have a very popular buffed Shadow Priest, even after the rework, okay, even after the change, which has pissed off a few Shadow Priest players, because the spec hasn't really gotten any more powerful or any better or like smoother to play, but is still just doing fine. Also, we have Warlocks, we have both Destruction and Demo doing very well, as well as a decent presence of Balance, as well as Devastation Evoker and Frost Mage as well. So quite the large, I guess, variety of options, you know, the choices available for the range DPS, at the very least at all key levels. Obviously, as you move things up to be more competitive, number one, what happens very often, the popularity of Beast Mastery drops in favor of Marksmanship. First of all, Shadow Priest becomes even more relevant in high keys, all of the mages drop over the all key levels, whereas Destruction Warlock gains even more. Now Destruction tries to gap the difference with Shadow Priest, as well as Balanced Druid gaining a little bit more, and Devastation being more or less the same as before. So, back to the original problem of Bloodlust in your party, Survival won't give you Bloodlust, Enhancement Shaman is also not going to be part of too many groups giving you Bloodlust. In here, Elemental Shaman is of course dead in the water, Mages are not nearly as popular, as well as Devastation Evoker is behind at least 3 other specs. So, the only possible spec in here to give you Bloodlust at a pretty annoying cost, which is Marksmanship Hunter having to pull out their pet to do it, it's basically just Hunter. It's basically just one spec. So it gives even more value to your healer if it can bring Bloodlust, because now you have situations where good groups, as you can see here from the some of the top runs right now above the 20 range, where compositions like a Fury Warrior, a Red Paladin and a Subtlety Rogue, or something like a Shadow Priest with a Balanced Druid and a Rogue, or a Windwalker Monk with a Havoc Demon Hunter and a Shadow Priest are all popular picks which lack Bloodlust, so you have to put it on your healer. That is one of the main benefits right now that Resto Shaman first and then second Preservation Evoker are benefiting from in a Mythic Plus key. Most of these picks should stay consistent even after we can assume all of the specs are going to be gaining their 4-piece set bonus from Season 2. When it comes to tanks, nothing really should change the power value of the tanks. Proto Paladin should still be easily first. When it comes to healers, it's a bit harder to gauge. As we mentioned, there are plenty of more powerful tier sets than the tier set that Resto Shaman will gain. Resto Shaman overall has amongst the weakest of the tier sets, so the other healers might be more likely to gain power, but as I said, if they remain gated by not having Bloodlust, that's really not gonna change too much. As for the melee DPS, the first one in line is Red Paladin, and the tier set gain of Red Paladin from swapping your Season 1 tier set into your Season 2 tier set is negligible. It's basically a couple of percentage of damage increase, so it's not really gonna get any stronger than this. However, it's not that the other specs are gaining that much more power. The only one that is somewhat possibly growing is Fury, because Fury has the best 4-piece set bonus out of all of the currently powerful DPS specs in Mythic Plus. Yes, Unholy Death Knight is good, but there is a problem. Unholy is at the moment far below the rest of the picks, and also it's a better choice for raid, for coordinated, big burst cooldowns once in a while, and not nearly as valuable in Mythic Plus. So the melee DPS should not change too much either. When it comes to the range DPS, the number one at the moment is Shadow Priest, and the Shadow Priest 4-piece tier bonus is average to below average, because it's decent by itself, but compared to the tier set they are losing, so compared to the Season 1 tier set they are replacing, it's barely even a damage gain. Meanwhile, there are other specs that actually do gain a significant amount of damage from their 4-piece set bonus, even while replacing their older set bonus. Number one, you have Demonology Warlock, which is getting quite stronger once they get their hands on the 4-piece. Balanced Druid also gets stronger than Shadow Priest once they get their tier set bonus. You have Arcane Mage getting stronger, and lastly, one of the larger gains is going to be for Devastation Evoker. All of these specs are going to be gaining 3 to 6% more damage over Shadow Priest in the next few weeks whenever they get their tier set bonuses. So that is what might change in the near future, once we can see the full power of the specs at their completed tier set bonuses of Season 2. We can then finish just to check if you guys have the same opinion as this, purely based on the rate of completion of the dungeon. So you can then finish by checking how actually Mythic Plus has been, besides just the specs and also the difficulty of the dungeon themselves. If I were to say, I would agree with the start, with Underrot and Freehold being the two by far easier of the dungeons. This is quite clear at the moment. Not really many debates are going to happen on these two at the top. Now, after Halls of Infusion and Uldaman being in the middle of the pack, I would also agree Halls of Infusion has somewhat of a nasty HPS check on the third boss. That's just about the only major trouble you will find in Tyrannical. So the rest of the dungeon is quite manageable, as well as Uldaman. Uldaman has, a few dangerous bosses. The second boss, the one you do first with Bloodlust, is one of the biggest problems in terms of healing and in terms of bursting down the totem before you all die. And then the last boss is somewhat of a race against time before the entire room gets filled with pools on the ground, but it's still amongst the more manageable side of dungeons. Then you start moving towards the bottom. You have, what a surprise, you have the 4 dungeons where the bosses were nerfed. You have Vortex Pinnacle and Brackenide Hollow right below the middle, and then Neltharus followed at the very end by Neltarian's Lair. I would in general agree with this. Personally, I would put Neltarian's Lair above Neltharus. I think at the moment Neltharus is harder than Neltarian's Lair. I still think that the bosses in Neltharus scale much harder and become much harder the higher the key goes up. Basically 2 out of the 4 bosses can become quite problematic later on, so I think it's harder overall, but in general there is a clear split right now between the top 4 dungeons in terms of ease and the bottom 4 dungeons in terms of ease of completion. This, however, has been so far for Tyrannical, so now we can then compare this with how hard things will begin to get once we enter Fortified and see just where the problems when it comes to trash mobs are going to be. So for now, this has been our first recap of the first week of Season 2 when it comes to Mythic Plus. Always useful to keep as a reminder, to keep as a time capsule to then check in the following weeks how things were in the first week and how things have changed since then. So with this reminder now being put out live, we can now leave each other for the rest of the start of this week on Monday. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel. You can, of course, as usual, support in plenty of other ways, like liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. You can then further support for free by following me over on my Twitter, as well as following me over on my stream on Twitch. So, with these useless things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, thank you. It finally stopped raining. I started making this video because I had to go out, but it was raining and I couldn't be bothered, so now perfect timing for a walk.